Hello gang, good to have you back again. Of course, if you're tuning in for the first time, I am the Articulate Grunt. Welcome to my channel. Now, you're on the internet. You should be fully aware of everything that's going on between Russia and the Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea, and everything that's been going on with that, all the political ramifications and different stuff that's been going on. However, recently I discovered that along with this, since the U.S. put a number of embargoes and blockades on Russia for their support of insurgents and anti-government forces in the Ukraine, Russia decided to strike back and have barred the sale of Russian-produced RD-180 rocket engines, which are used by the U.S. to power our Atlas V rockets into orbit. Now, these are the rockets we use to send up our GPS and communication satellites, which, in case you didn't know, GPS is still a program by the government that your various GPS and smartphone companies get contracts to allow them to use. In addition to this, Russia has stated quite plainly that their side of the International Space Station can operate independently and without us, but considering we no longer have a space program, our side cannot operate without their assistance, because we've been sending our astronauts up in Soviet rockets to get to the space station at $60 million per person. Well, Russia's going to cut that off too. No more access for U.S. astronauts. Once the 2016 contract has concluded, they can't cut us off from the already agreed upon and paid for contract without violating all sorts of international laws and getting into all sorts of other stuff. So we've got a year or so for that. But what this does is highlight two things that I've been preaching for quite a while, something I find personally a little bit stupid. First off is the suspension of our own space program, the space shuttles, without having a U.S. manned space program to replace it, because it was done and we don't have it. So we have to rely on Russia. Additionally, we've been purchasing the RD-180 rocket engines from Russia since 1999 at a cost of $32 million apiece. And we were supposed to get all the plans and everything so we could produce them domestically, but that never happened. It's 2014. 15 years, they've never delivered. Yeah. Because what this did was A, make us solely dependent on a foreign power for our space program and access to our materials, as well as the ability to get our materials into space. And B, export billions of dollars in U.S. jobs overseas to a foreign power. Now, the cutoff of rocket engines is immediate. However, we already have a purchase stockpile on hand to maintain us for 22 months. Oh, well, that'll let us get everything out of the way, get back on good relations, start buying again. Why? Why would we do that? Seeing that it's already a weakness that can be exploited and held over our head, why would we do that? In turn, we have an opportunity to reclaim a bit of our national sovereignty. Please excuse me for using such phrases, but quite simply, to no longer be dependent on a foreign nation. Several U.S. rocket companies are vying for contracts to replace the RD-180. GenCorp, a U.S. company, is already working on their AR-1 rocket system, has already invested about $300 million in what's estimated to be a $2 trillion value market, and estimate that at the latest, they'll have it up and running, able to get Atlas V rockets back in space by 2018. With our current stock of RD-180s on hand, we'll run out sometime 2016, beginning of 2017. That's about a year of downtime. And we may actually already be able to purchase them once again by then, with current conflicts and such out of the way. But other than to hold us over that little bit of a gap, why? Why go back to spending $32 million per rocket engine to pay a foreign company who could cut us off at a moment's notice when a U.S. company is poised to be able to replace the product with a more modern and viable long-term rocket engine at a cost of $20 to $22 million per rocket instead of 32, as well as I mentioned, bring all those jobs, all that money back to the U.S. You're going to need everything from your baseline janitors sweeping the floors, taking out the trash for the facilities, up to high-end engineers, mid-round welders to put everything together, the whole enchilada, everything, bringing it home. Oh, and by the way, that's estimated to be, by the year 2024, a $2 trillion market. That's just the rockets that we need now, the engines we need now, is estimated to accelerate to being a $2 trillion profit market. Think about it. That's big money, big jobs back in the U.S. rather than being shipped overseas to somebody who's been our enemy so many times and who has no problem trying to exploit any weakness they see. As a matter of fact, Soviets have already said that in order to rectify things, one, we'll have to drop all of our embargoes and things against them for their actions in Crimea and the Ukraine, but also open up space in the U.S. for their satellite control stations. That's right. In order to get the rocket engines flowing freely again, we not only have to reverse our stance on everything in the Ukraine, but give them space to put in satellite control centers here in the U.S. I'm thinking, no. So, in summary, the Soviets have cut off the RD-180 rockets to the U.S., which launches our Atlas V rockets into space, taking care of our communications and GPS satellites. Thus, we're no longer paying them $32 million per rocket. They've also cut off our astronauts from the International Space Station at a cost of $60 million per man. And several U.S. companies are vying for the contract to replace said rocket engines, which we've only got 22 months supply of, the leading of which being GenCorp, who say they can get us spaceborne again no later than 2018 at the latest, at a cost of $20 to $22 million per launch. For the rocket engines, that is. Bringing a $2 trillion industry back home to the U.S. rather than paying it to a foreign power who think nothing of cutting us off, even though we've got contracts. Contracts which haven't been fully completed in 15 years, i.e. the plans and such so we could produce them domestically. And by the way, for those of you interested, GenCorp's current market price per share is $19.20 per share. I don't have the extra money to invest, or I might consider it, though the stock market's not usually my thing, and I am not a stock market expert by any means. I just looked it up to have the extra information. Thank you for tuning in. Leave your thoughts and comments down below. Hit the like or dislike. Share with your friends. Subscribe if you haven't already. Tweet it so everybody can get up to speed on the information. And I hope this found you the best mental, physical, and emotional health. Take care of yourself, and I will catch you later. I am the Articulate Grunt. Out from here. Bye.